Brothers and sisters, to WELL's seventh webinar in our conference, our COVID-19 webinar series. My name is Victor Griego. I'm the president and founder of WELL. Welcome you to this webinar titled California Drought, the State's Response and the Financial Impacts on Communities. I want to first acknowledge our sponsors for the event. They're the Eastern Water District, Trejo Leal Law Firm, and California Water Service. And of course, our ongoing word of appreciation to our associate members, the Metropolitan Water District of Southern California, Water Replenishment District, Valley Water, and AARP is a newest associate member. So if anyone is interested in becoming an associate member for WELL, please speak to Paul Hernandez, our executive director, to learn how you can become an associate member. A special welcome to all of our local elected officials from cities, counties, school districts, and water agencies throughout California. A good number of folks have signed up for this webinar. We have over 100 attendees, most being local elected officials. And those are exactly the leaders that WELL educates and trains. It's a constituency that is closest to the people, to the voters. They're the ones that most residents ask questions about when asking about their government. So we believe it's important to have these elected officials educated on one of the most important California public policy issues of the day. I want to remind everyone of WELL's mission. We are entering our 10th year of service. We educate local Latino officials about California water policy to promote timely and equitable actions that serve to develop a robust economy, healthy communities, and a resilient environment for all Californians. Now remember, WELL is not just for Latinos. We here at WELL believe anyone who serves a Latino constituent is a Latino leader. And in California, that's about 90% of elected officials. So that means everyone is welcome to participate in WELL's programs. And a special note for our WELL Untapped, it's an education and training fellowship. WELL Untapped is a 6-month learning program where we visit different California watersheds to learn about water policy and issues from that local watershed perspective. To learn more about this fellowship, you can go to our website or the chat room on the Zoom webinar. I'd like to have a special shout out to the WELLOs on our participation today. If you look at the chat, there are a number of participants, local elected officials who've participated in or who are planning to. I see Cindy Wu, a school board member, is on the chat here. Javier Vargas, Jim Crowfoot. I see, of course, we have Jean Hernandez is our moderator, who I'll introduce in a second. We have Dr. Monica Sanchez. We have several folks who've signed up for our current class, Sherry Waniger. So I welcome all of the WELLOs to continue their education with WELL, and welcome to this webinar. But now let me introduce our moderator who will lead us today for this important conversation. WELL Untapped graduate and the City of Yorba Linda Councilmember Jean Hernandez. I get to share a little bit about Jean. I've known Jean now for about 6 or 7 years. Jean is a loving husband, a devoted family man, a person of an active, deep spiritual faith while serving others, and a commitment to public service. He is also a very dedicated leader in what we do here at Water Education for Latino Leaders. And there's one thing that I always remember about Jean, and that is he's always at the conferences and workshops, he's in the front of the room, he listens intensely, takes copious notes, asks great questions, and we are excited to have him as our moderator today for this webinar. Councilman Hernandez, we are excited to have you. So kick off this exciting conversation with your moderation. Thank you.
Thank you, Victor, for that more than I deserve introduction, but I certainly appreciate it. And I welcome my colleagues and all those interested in water. And that should be everybody. This is a great topic. a topic of interest because it's about our life. We need water or we don't survive. And we are in a drought. And our challenge is waking up our fellow colleagues, and I'm talking about elected officials now, that this is an issue. I found when I went through the first class of Well Untapped, how little I knew. In fact, I like to say that I didn't even know what I didn't know. And now I know what I don't know. And it was quite an education going up and down the state to identify where the different issues are per area that you're in. Great program. I invite all to attend. So with that, we have very limited time, and I apologize for that. We've got an hour to cover a topic that would take you a couple of weeks, but we've got some subject matter experts that are going to do their best to jump in here. And so we're going to start off with Tom Love, who's the general manager for Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District. So Tom, please take it away.
Well, thank you. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start off by talking from a regional perspective. In order to do that, I'll need to talk about the water supply situation in the entire Western United States. Before I get there, Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District serves a large portion of the San Gabriel Valley in Los Angeles County, comprising about 19 cities, population of nearly 1 million people. We are a member of Metropolitan Water District, which provides imported water supply to much of Southern California. And so Metropolitan Water District has supplies that come from both the Colorado River watershed and from the State Water Project. And I want to put this in perspective, what this drought is like in a large regional basis across the Western United States, because it impacts us throughout the state. And Stephanie, if I could have that first slide on the drought monitor pulled up. So this is not a pretty picture. The red, dark, and brownish red are extreme or exceptional drought. And you see that covers the entire Western United States. Along California, certainly the entire state of California is in drought, not only locally here in Southern California, but across the state, including the watersheds that supply that State Water Project. And then extending over into Utah, although we're not showing Wyoming or Colorado, but the Colorado River watershed is also in extreme drought. In fact, this year, as the first time in history, the Bureau of Reclamation, who operates the Colorado River system, declared the first ever shortage on the Colorado River. And under that first stage of storage, the states of Arizona and Nevada do have to curtail the amount of water they take off the Colorado River next year. California isn't impacted yet, but if these conditions continue, California could be impacted. Jump to the next slide, please. But we've got the same situation on the State Water Project. This is the Northern Sierra Precipitation H-Station Index, and this is the principal indicator of how much water supply is going to be available to the State Water Project. You can see the average is about 53 inches of precipitation annually. You can see the wettest year on record in Northern California was not too long ago. It was the 16-17 water year. 2021 in black, that's kind of in the middle of that shaded blue area, is the third driest in history. So the just past water year was the third driest in history. 1920 wasn't much better. And currently we're running about 15.9 inches in the H-Station Index. We had a tremendous storm come through Northern California in early October, put us on a good start. But as I put it, at that time, it was the World Series, and you can hit a grand slam in the opening inning of the World Series, but you got 7 more games to play, and we've got several more months of the rainy season where hopefully that blue line will stay at least above the average line as we go forward. So you can take that off for now, and I'll talk a little bit more about what that means to us. Certainly anyone in Central Valley, Northern California, the entire state is in a very dire situation. What I've started to call is our worst drought in history, followed by our previous worst drought in history, which we just experienced a few years ago. So it's a very critical situation. Here in Southern California, there has been preparations made for this kind of dry situation. And at the beginning of 2021, the Metropolitan Water District had a record amount of water in storage. And so they were pretty well positioned. However, most of that storage is on their Colorado River system, and they cannot move that water to their entire service area. There are still areas of metropolitan service area, primarily the northwestern part of Los Angeles County, including parts of the city of Los Angeles, that are really dependent on that state water project supplies, as well as parts of the Inland Empire in San Bernardino County. And so that's where we're focusing our efforts, is what do we need to do for conservation in what we call those state water project exclusive areas or state water project constrained areas. And to put it in perspective as to how severe it is on December 1st, the Department of Water Resources released their initial allocation on the state water project for the year 2022. This current year, it is at 5% of its total capacity, but their initial allocation announced on December 1st was 0%. It has never been that low in history. Hopefully we'll get rains through December and January and that number will grow. But if it remains at 0%, there are areas here in Los Angeles and other parts of the state water project where some of those agencies are considering prohibiting all outdoor water use in urban areas, except perhaps of hand watering to keep plant or trees and shrubs alive. So it could get pretty severe. We're doing everything we can now to encourage conservation, preserve those supplies so they'll last as long as possible. But you could see in mid-spring to early spring of 2022, if we don't get a significant amount of precipitation in Northern California, there could be some severe rationing or mandatory conservation. And so I'll stop there and let our moderator take over.
Well, thank you, Tom. That was very good information, not necessarily a positive note, but that's a wake-up call, and we need to pay attention. Our next panelist is Elizabeth Nunez, the city manager of the city of San Joaquin, who is feeling this issue head on. Take it away, Elizabeth. Elizabeth, you're muted.
Thank you. I guess that's important to make sure everyone can hear me. So I'll start over, and again, welcome everyone. I'll be sharing a little bit about the impacts the drought has had on the Central Valley, particularly in my community, San Joaquin, just so you have a clear picture of what the Central Valley looks like in San Joaquin. Here in San Joaquin, the community is predominantly Hispanic, farm working community, high percentage of undocumented. We are considered a severely disadvantaged community. Median household income is about $25,000. And keep in mind, this will be important, as I mentioned later, about half of our community are renters. And again, I'll mention why that is important. But today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the economic, the environmental, and the social impacts that the drought has had on our community. When we think about the drought, I think we first go to the farmers and how it's destroyed their crops, the loss of money, but that translates into a loss of jobs for the farm workers in the community. That, also, aside from the household, translates into loss of money for the municipalities. As a city, that has an impact on our tax revenues. Our ability to provide services is impacted. When we had the last drought, our tax revenues decreased by about 30-some%. We had to make some adjustments to our budget, which meant that youth services were cut, senior programs were eliminated.
Elizabeth, you still with us? Stephanie, are you getting any correspondence with Elizabeth?
No, I don't know what's going on. 1 second.
Gene, in the meantime, perhaps we can move on to our next panelists while we bring up Elizabeth back on a later time.
That's a good idea. Excellent.
Thanks, sir.
Okay, let me see if I can get my video started here. Okay, our next panelist is Eddie Ocampo. He's the director of the Community Sustainability and Self-Help Enterprises. Eddie, take it away.
Well, thank you, Gene.
Eddie, you're on mute.
Rookie mistake. Sorry about that. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to be here. As you can see, we lack a heck of a lot of resources here in the Central Valley. Some of those resources include, reliable broadband access. So I'm sure we'll be hearing back from Elizabeth shortly. But let me provide a little background, perspective from an organization, a service organization that does, we try to do our best to be responsive of a lot of the needs that happen here in our Central Valley. Self-Help Enterprises serves 8 counties in the San Joaquin Valley. And those counties are Stanislaus, Merced, Mariposa, Madera, Fresno, Tulare, Kings, and Kern. We are a nationally recognized nonprofit and community development organization whose mission is to work together with low-income families to build and sustain healthy homes and communities. Our community development and community sustainability departments provide technical assistance and leadership development in rural communities that face safe drinking water, sanitary sewer, and other infrastructural challenges. Since 1965, we have assisted in over 6,700 rehab and emergency home repairs, over 2,200 home buyer assistance efforts, over 14,300 housing consults, built over 6,400 affordable homes, and have built over 1,600 affordable multifamily units, along with facilitating over 32,500 water and sewer connections here in our service area. Our approach consists of working collaboratively to engage with community, local government, and other stakeholders. We listen to concerns, ideas, questions. We conduct surveys. We assist communities in seeking the most sustainable and affordable solutions to their drinking water issues. And we assist with interim measures until long-term solutions are reached, such as consolidations. Our service area is also very much, our service area actually serves a lot of the farm worker community. In fact, our valley accounts for about half of the farm workers in the state of California. The unemployment rates in the Central Valley are double those of West Virginia, which is many times the leader in unemployment levels in the United States. The per capita income is lower than any in the Western United States. We are very much the other California, and we are often not counted in the prosperity that identifies our Golden State and to the rest of the country. Lack of resources are very much accentuated in many of our rural and unincorporated areas. Decaying water systems, failing sewer, septic systems are often neglected by financially strapped community service districts, special districts, and small municipalities like Elizabeth, City of San Joaquin. Some of these systems are literally plugging holes to keep operational. This approach of responding to emergencies, like anytime we respond to emergencies, is not the most efficient and tends to be more expensive. As a result, many times, many of our disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged communities pay far and beyond what their urban neighbors pay. Our state's prolonged drought, hotter and longer summers have not helped the situation. Lack of access to affordable, safe, reliable drinking water supply is a common problem here in our valley, either because of dropping ground levels due to overpumping, infrastructural problems due to aging and dilapidated water systems or private domestic well failures, or water contamination from a whole barrage of contaminants, such as nitrate, arsenic, uranium, organic chemicals, and bacteria. But let's go back to the drought. Although our community water efforts started in 1974 as a response to identifying, facilitating access to the resource, water, sewer, infrastructure in many of the areas that we wanted to build affordable housing. Back in 1974, we realized that, a lot of the areas we needed to build just didn't have the infrastructure. So we started back in 1984. Our water work started back in 74, excuse me. But it really did begin in earnest in 2014 with this latest prolonged drought that Tom was mentioning. And at that time, we created the Emergency Services Program, which is now led by Tammy McVeigh, who's doing a phenomenal job of leading a group of folks to being responsive to a lot of the drought issues that are affecting our service area. The idea at the time was to create an effort that would result in more efficient response to the rising drought-related calls that at the time were averaging about 15 to 20 calls a day. Folks were calling with dry wells. Imagine getting calls 15 to 20 times a day with somebody's well going dry. Situation was frustrating because we didn't have any answers. We didn't have a response plan at the time. We were just reacting, and we're trying to reach out to folks to identify solutions. At that time, Paul Boyer, who recently retired as our community development director, helped design a tank water delivery system. The system was pretty simple. The design was pretty simple. It was replicable, and it would allow folks to stay in their homes. Consisted of a 2,500 gallon tank connected to the home's plumbing and a 1 horsepower booster pump that pumped water into the house from the tank. This was done in coordination with bottled water delivery for human consumption. That's how we got started with our drought response. Since then, under Tammy's leadership through the county Office of Emergency Services, the State Water Board, and private fundraising, our organization has facilitated the installation of over 1,700 tanks and serviced or replaced over 350 wells. Efforts are expanding because there's more need. And as efforts are expanding, we receive additional support from the State Water Board, which at this moment is our biggest funder for this crucial drought-related emergency response work, which now includes domestic well repair or replacement, water system consolidations, well assessments, water quality testing, water filtration installation, and the delivery, of course, of bottled water. With the drought getting more attention from legislators, additional drought funding is becoming available. This time through the Department of Water Resources. Around $500 million statewide is becoming available, with $95 million being designated for urban drought relief. $95 million statewide. $200 million for multi-benefit drought relief statewide, and $190 million for small community drought relief statewide. The $190 million is available to small communities, like many of those small communities located here in the Valley, including DACs and tribes. It is on a first come, first served basis, and the program is funded through December of 2023. No match is required. The applicant does not have to be the beneficiary. The funding can cover land acquisition, which is very important, particularly when you're looking at locating a new well. The funding is not for individual wells, though, just for community wells, up to 3,000 connections. This is a promising funding source as it allows for immediate and intermediate solutions such as hauled water, temporary community water tanks, bottled water, water vending machines, and emergency water interties, as well as long and near-term solutions such as reliable water supplies, consolidations, water system storage, pipe replacement, and backup power source installations. This is currently what we're doing as an organization, and as you can see, there's a whole lot of money being piped into the service area. This need that exists statewide, but we're talking statewide, so obviously we're still running into issues where we're not able to provide all the needed service, particularly for the need that's popping up in our service area. That's Gene, back to you.
Boy, Eddie, you couldn't have timed that better. I was just going to chime in. You did well, my friend. Thank you so much. Okay, I think we're going to bring Elizabeth back now. I think she's with us. Elizabeth, are you with us? You're on mute again, Elizabeth. There you go.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'm going to try to make it through this. I'm sorry. A lot of coffee and heat, a combination don't mix. So I'm going to go ahead and just jump into the two major impacts that the drought has had on our community. If we talk about environmental impacts, we have dry soils that
Let's give her a couple seconds here, Gene, before.
Yep.
Gene, if you could ask the audience for questions, and then we'll move into that section here.
Well, it looks like I've got a couple of questions here, and particularly for Eddie. Deborah Lucero's asked some really good questions here. The first one, Eddie, are you able to help all those that need help with wells and or tank installation? Who's going unserved, and how many?
You know, we unfortunately aren't able to help everybody. We're limited to folks within our service area. And sometimes, you know, it is income-based. Sometimes folks may not necessarily qualify, but we do our best to at least connect folks with services. And, you know, but I said for the vast majority, because a lot of folks do qualify, we are able to help the bulk of the folks that reach out to us.
And another good question she follows up with, are temporary tanks meant to be permanent solutions?
They're not. These are meant to be, particularly on when folks have a domestic private well, they're meant to essentially, for lack of a better term, hold folks over so that they can wait out the wait time to have their well repaired, replaced, or you know, or fixed. Sometimes this can take up to 8 months because there's a huge you know, delay in getting folks out there because of the demand.
And then finally, how big is your service area? Are you considering expanding your service area throughout LAFCO?
You know, our service area is actually 8 counties. It starts at the base of the Grapevine and goes all the way up to the San Joaquin River, all 8 counties in between. At this point, that would be a board decision from our board of directors to expand our service area. Occasionally, we do go out north into San Joaquin County and provide service there, but that's on a case-per-case basis. And we wouldn't have to go through LAFCO to be able to go into another expand the area. Would be more of a decision that the board of directors would have to make.
Thank you, Eddie. And Paul Hernandez weighed in with conservation won't, and we all agree with this, won't solve our current drought challenges. What other programs or strategies can local leaders begin to discuss today to lessen our need for imported water? And what does it mean to have water restrictions imposed in our community? And what are the various levels of water restrictions we can expect to have imposed as drought conditions progress and worsen? I guess that would be for either one. Yes, Tom, go ahead.
Yeah. Let me take those. Throughout California, I think everywhere is looking for how can we make sure we're putting our local water resources to the best use possible. So I'll talk about here in Southern California. A good portion of our area has spent a lot of time and effort in implementing projects that capture recycled wastewater and capture stormwater. And we still have a lot more work to do in tapping those resources that are already here on our service area. I will say that we've been fairly successful in those in some locations, such as here in the San Gabriel Valley. The wastewater treatment plants that are operated by the Los Angeles County Sanitation District, the ones that are nearest to us, 100% of the water produced at those plants is put to beneficial reuse. So it's being done, it has been done, but we need to go down to the large coastal plants and pick up some of that water. The city of LA has some plans to recycle the water from one of the largest wastewater treatment plants on the West Coast, the Hyperion treatment plant. And Metropolitan Water District is working with the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts to implement the largest water recycling project in the country. They call it the Regional Recycled Water Program. And well, I don't want to say if, because it has to be implemented. When implemented, here for us in the San Gabriel Valley, it could completely offset our dependence on imported water. So, but those projects take time and they take a lot of money to get done. So what do we do now? We need to continue our conservation efforts. We did a great job during the previous drought when Governor Brown mandated a 25% conservation statewide. Some areas overachieved, some under, but overall we met that. And people did not bounce back very much after that drought. Water use is still down and people are still conserving.
Well, having said that, Tom, though, what about when we did those massive conservations? We didn't have a pandemic. Now we have COVID. We have more people living at home. How is that going to impact these water ratios?
So in some respects, whether those people are off at a business working or in their homes, they're still going to use the same amount of water. So they're going to flush the toilet at work or they're going to flush the toilet at home. But when we talk about water use restrictions on a property basis, the water efficiency legislation passed a few years ago recognizes that it's not on a per household basis where we put on water restrictions. It's on a per capita basis, gallons per capita per day. So those allocations, and the goal is 55 gallons per person per day for indoor water use. So if you've got 3 people in a home or 10 people in a home, that water use restriction is adjusted to recognize there are more people actually living in a home than prior to the pandemic.
And another question here, Tom, is how is the initial determination from the DWR on virtual zero allocation from the state water project affecting your service area or could affect the service area?
And so I'll start here locally and then expand to a regional answer to that. So here in the San Gabriel Valley, we actually have a very large groundwater basin. And in the wet years of 2017 and again in 2019, we worked with Metropolitan Water District to pre-deliver water and store it in the groundwater basin. So this year we were able to defer a demand on the state water project of about 40 to 50,000 acre feet, which is really helpful because that water then is available for others who can't defer. But if you go over into the western San Fernando Valley, City of Los Angeles, Simi Valley, and the Las Virgenes Water District, they are highly dependent on that state water project supply. So if it does end up at a zero allocation, the Department of Water Resources is looking at basic health and safety requirements that they want to try and continue delivery. But health and safety means you're not going to water your lawn. The golf course is not going to get water. And so it could have an impact on some businesses who rely on or water intensive businesses. Hopefully not. I mean, we just went through a shutdown of the pandemic. The last thing we want to do to the economy is have a shutdown because of lack of water. But I mean, action is needed. Those communities and us, the rest of us who do depend on state water project water, need to do whatever we can to minimize our use of that water to go as long as we can.
And thank you, Tom. And again, I would encourage all our listening audience, please use the Q&A portion there to get these questions asked. That's where I'm pulling them from.
You know,
Tom, I'm sorry, go ahead, Eddie.
You know, one of the things also, I mean, particularly when you know, allocation drops to zero, near zero, folks that need these water sources tend to rely more heavily on the groundwater. That tends to put, you know, some of the more vulnerable neighbors and even, you know, more vulnerable states. I mean, because, you know, deeper wells would potentially suck more water from, you know, somebody who may have a more shallow well, but, you know, it overall doesn't contribute toward the long-term sustainability goals of Sigma, and you know, could potentially affect a lot of folks that are in a region that's already impacted, you know, like the Central Valley, for example. But we had another question also as to how we are interacting locally with the ag industry. Well, at least here in the Central Valley, we're talking to each other, which we haven't done as much in the past. You know, I think communities are talking to each other. I think everybody is becoming more aware that this resource is something worth protecting, and that we need to collaborate on long-term solutions, and that's promising. So we're part of a lot of these discussion groups that are inviting folks from communities, EJ groups, CBOs, municipal government, and the ag leaders in our area to identify sustainable approaches to conservation. And all of these are going to hurt us across the board. I think we just have to be realistic in those discussions, and it's promising at this point. Hopefully we continue to make some progress there.
If I could jump in here, Eddie, again, Tom, can you talk about the Sites Reservoir and what will it do for the Central Valley?
So the Sites Reservoir, it's an off-stream reservoir. In other words, there's a lot of dams and reservoirs in California. Most of them are built on rivers or streams. And those were built 40, 50 years ago. In today's world, trying to dam a river, especially if it happens to be a salmon running river, is probably not practical or possible with the environmental requirements of today. So new storage reservoirs off stream that aren't impeding the flow of a natural river seem to be the way to go. And Sites Reservoir is one of those. So it is in Northern California. It's near the Delta. And it is under the early preliminary planning stages right now. What that reservoir will do is when we do have wet years or there's rainfall and water is moving through the Bay Delta to the ocean, they will be able to move some of that water and store it in that reservoir for a dry period sometime in the future. So it will be beneficial to essentially all the water users that utilize the Delta, including the State Water Project, which does use the Delta for conveyance. So it will be beneficial in that standpoint. But I think it points out that one of the things we've realized in the recent drought and the current drought is storage is critical. And it can't just be groundwater storage, which is great. We certainly utilize groundwater storage here in the San Gabriel Valley. But surface storage where large amounts of water can quickly be stored during those atmospheric river precipitation events. We need more of those, and we need them in different locations throughout the state. So here in Southern California, we've realized we've got a good amount of storage available on the Colorado River side. We are limited on storage on the State Water Project side.
That leads into a nice transition to another anonymous question here that, and I have a law enforcement background, so this is interesting. Is water theft using tanker trucks a problem either from the aqueduct or other areas? Many of those areas, like what you're talking about, Tom, those surface storage areas. Do you find thefts occurring there of water?
I don't know about it in the Central Valley, but my experience is no, that has never been a big problem. Just anecdotally, a few years ago during the last drought, you may have seen some newspaper coverage of a famous Hollywood star, Magnum PI, Tom Selleck, was taking trucked water from the Callegas, actually it was Thousand Oaks, which is the Callegas Municipal Water District, over to a little property he had near there outside their service area. And the paper said he's stealing water. It turns out he actually was paying for the water, but the city wasn't supposed to allow him to move that water outside the Callegas boundary. But no, here in Southern California and along the Colorado River Aqueduct, doesn't seem to be a big problem.
Well, as this gets tighter and tighter and more scarce, that could be something to keep an eye out for.
Yeah, and it is. I think it may be more of an issue for smaller systems that have to, operate and maintain their systems. Particularly if they're buying water from a larger system, and they still have to account for that water that's being stolen. But it's not so much what is stolen through tankers. It's more about illegal connections up in the Central Valley. Folks may illegally connect to the system and maybe be utilizing some of this water for household use, or in some cases for industrial or agricultural use in some of these communities. And it is a pretty big impact on some of these smaller systems that would ultimately have to pay for that through passing that on to the ratepayers, or just going into essentially the piggy bank and paying for any of the overages.
Another nice transition, Eddie. So what are some of the financial burdens associated with prolonged period of drought, and what programs or resources that we can tap into help alleviate some of the financial burdens our residents can face during a period of drought?
As far as the resources, I wish we had more, but I will tell you that at least here in the Central Valley, if folks do not have the capacity of communities, it's the small, particularly small disadvantaged or severely disadvantaged communities do not have the capacity to grow or able to support new development, that affects their tax base. If they don't have the capacity to be able to build a new grocery market, that affects the ability of their residents to access food and sometimes services. And so these de facto moratoriums, because they just don't have capacity, obviously affect services across the board for a lot of these disadvantaged communities, and they have to drive farther to get what they need, which means they pay that less. In many cases, they're already they're a lot worse off than many of their neighbors. So that's
the sad thing with that, Eddie, is that the disadvantaged communities have been disadvantaged for quite some time. It wasn't just this drought put them in a spin. They've had this issue going on for years. Now, having said that, how are you interacting, or Tom, either the two, interacting with the ag industry, since ag utilizes 85 to 90% of California water? We can do our best to conserve, but you're only talking about 10% users. How about those other 90%?
Yeah, so and this is more of a question for the people at Metropolitan Water District who interact on the state water project on a regular basis. But I will say this, when you look at the water use in the state of California, and actually when you say 80% goes to ag and 20% goes to urban, that amount of water is only a fraction of the amount of water that falls on California. The vast majority of water in California goes to the environment. And then we have whatever's left over. So if you look at the history of agriculture in California, they have gotten tremendously more efficient in their use of water. In order to grow an acre of a certain crop, they used to use a lot more water than they do now. However, they have expanded production, and they have done so utilizing a lot of groundwater. So a number of years ago, the state passed the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act to make sure that those groundwater basins are sustainably managed, and that is underway. We're not there yet. We're a long way off. It's underway. But I do know that Metropolitan does work with agriculture on ways to balance the water supply from year to year. Most of that effort, at least here in Southern California, is done out on in the Palo Verde and Imperial Irrigation District with land fallowing programs. The farmers are paid not to plant in a particular year, and that water supply is made available for urban uses. So that's the interaction that I'm aware of that we here in Southern California have had with the agricultural industry.
Well, and that's a great, another segue to a great question here, that agriculture, and I've heard this perception many times, is in part and parcel responsible for many of the water shortages in the communities. Seems like they should be financially part of the remediation of wells going dry in disadvantaged communities. Of course, I've heard that they will argue that, well, wait a minute, that was way in the past. We now do much more scientific agricultural, using less water, making it stretch further. But your thoughts, Tom?
Well, actually, I'm going to defer that one to Eddie. I just reiterate, while they may have gotten more efficient on a water use per acre basis, the number of acres in production has grown dramatically, especially with high value crops like almonds and pistachios. But I think the impact on those communities and those community wells in the Central Valley, I think, is better answered by Eddie.
Eddie?
Yeah, thank you, Tom, and thank you, Neil. Gene, excuse me. I do. That's a complicated question. We obviously don't have sustainability. Folks are growing, are more efficient in using water, but yes, they're planting more crops, and their operations have grown quite a bit. That does affect vulnerable communities, disadvantaged communities, particularly because we're competing for the same groundwater sources. Particularly in situations where there's less allocation, like in these drought years. So as folks rely more and more more heavily on groundwater, even though we're trying to gain sustainability, that does affect their more vulnerable neighbors, like disadvantaged and severely disadvantaged and other vulnerable communities. Folks, like I mentioned earlier, we are talking to each other, which is promising. We have a long way to go. I think ultimately some of the decisions that are going to have to be made are going to involve, tightening the belt across the board. And I think that a lot of the partners on the ag side are looking more realistically at this sustainability question. We have to be more proactive, and we have to be more engaged, and we have to be more realistic as to how we're going to approach this. Otherwise, 2040 is going to come around really quick, and we're not going to meet those goals that we're trying to meet through Sigma of gaining sustainability. But a lot of it has to recognizing that maybe we would have to look at alternative uses for some of these ag practices, and we may have to look at alternative uses for the land that's being currently used, which is a hard discussion to have, particularly here in the Valley, particularly when our service base, the folks that we try to service are farm workers who rely very heavily on ag, but who are also very vulnerable to a lot of the ag practices that affect their access to safe, affordable, and clean water.
Well, let me just throw out there, and I think it's one that we've actually skirted so far, and we actually have a lot of electeds here. And I would say the bottom line is that our electeds need to get more involved in this process. It's policies that have to drive the law. We need to say, okay, we have the vast majority of our drinking water is not safe. It's contaminated, and you'd be amazed where that's occurring all up and down the state. Nobody is immune from this. So, well, the question is, what are 1 or 2 points we can walk away with today? Well, one, as an elected, you're a policymaker, and I think it's your responsibility to educate yourself, talk with your fellow colleagues and throughout your county and the county supervisors to say, okay, this is unacceptable. If this were air that you couldn't breathe, trust me, we'd be all over it. Well, water is just as bad. And when we can't drink it, it's not safe. And the answer is we can't buy enough bottled water to sustain this state. So what are we going to do? So what are 1 or 2 good points that we can walk away from today with?
Well, I'll start by saying, one of the things we've struggled with is being able to get this large scale infrastructure funded in a way where it can move forward. And I will say, as far as infrastructure goes, there's 3 areas that we need to do for more sustainable water supply across the state of California. Number 1 is to complete the Delta conveyance facilities. Governor Brown supported 2 tunnels. Governor Newsom is moving forward with 1 tunnel. We got to get that across the goal line. It will take a couple of decades to get that done if we keep moving along. And it is not going to take more water from Northern California, but when we have extremely wet years, which we do periodically, we'll be able to take a lot of that water and move it into storage. The second, of course, is we do need storage in order to put that water. So continue with the Sykes Reservoir. Metropolitan is now looking at other opportunities for storage along the state water project that could benefit multiple regions. And then the fourth is local water resources development. Can we get funding? And we'll need both the state and federal electeds to help us with this. We've made great progress. Congresswoman Napolitano was successful in getting a new program in for large scale water recycling projects, $500 million per project. That's a big step, but we need to continue in those efforts. So threefold: invest in the infrastructure of how we move water through California. Secondly, invest in storage of water across California. And third, invest in local resource development throughout our communities in the state.
Thank you, Tom. And I will recommend or suggest that as a politician, that what's happening is some counties have invested more in their water infrastructure than others. So what we start to see now is the haves and have-nots. And that's going to put greater pressure on the haves to say, yes, we need, just as good citizens of this state and country, to share with the have-nots. But the argument you'll get is that, well, why didn't they invest money when we were doing it? And it hurt us, but are we the only ones who had the vision to do it kind of concept? So I would suggest, colleagues, that we're going to have an issue out there when, hey, help us out. And we're saying, well, why was all that water running out to the ocean and, and instead of capturing it? So just some good food for thought and discussion. And maybe that's the real takeaway. Start the water discussion now. It's already late in the game, but start it now. And let's get moving forward. And a quick question here. Does anyone know how much of the ag products, goods are exported out of the state? I would say probably a vast majority, because we are a large producer of this country's ag product, but I don't know the exact percentage. Anyone?
I do not.
Okay.
I don't.
And then last question here. What is the one water approach, and why is it important during this period?
So I'll take that one. So Metropolitan Water District has a new general manager, Adele Hagakalil, started in July, so fairly new. And pretty quickly, Adele came up and started promoting what he calls the one water approach. And so I'll try and speak for him as best I can, but I think it's multifaceted. It has to do with infrastructure and investment. We can't look at our water supply as, well, we got our local water supply over here, we got our imported state water project or Colorado River water over here. We need to look at all of our water supplies, stormwater, imported water, local water supplies, recycled water as one water. But I think it's more than that. It's also from a policy and governance standpoint, we need to work together. And it's just what you just said. We can't be parochial about, oh, well, this is best for me, so that's what I want to do. We need to do what's good for all, and take the Three Musketeers approach. All for one and one for all. And I think that's what is meant by the one water approach.
Thank you, Todd. That's an excellent explanation. And I would think that cities are getting more and more of that mindset, because we're taking on issues now, or tasked with issues that are much broader than beyond our city limits. I mean, you're talking transportation, immigration, housing. These are all huge topics that affect our whole region, not just our city. So we do need to have more of a collaborative, get involved, a seat at the table. Let's discuss it. Now,
And Gene, on that
Yeah,
note,
go ahead.
on that collaborative note, I mean, yeah, some folks definitely are just better positioned. Some communities and some municipalities are better positioned to take it, to be able to access some of the funds when these become available. A lot of communities that are, less well positioned, like for example, disadvantaged communities, may not necessarily be able to access or pursue available opportunities as these come up. And that's one of the things that we need to consider when we're being critical of why certain areas or regions may not necessarily be investing in some of these opportunities when these come up. Sometimes it's just not at a place where they can. And if we are truly going to be taking this sustainable collaborative approach across the whole state, which we really need to start looking at that way, I think we need to start realizing that sometimes we need to help our neighbor. And in helping your neighbor, we're making the entire state more sustainable. And we could start regionally. We could start out, and in the past we struggled to convince certain municipalities to allow folks to consolidate their neighbor who may not necessarily have water. Now it's not so much of an issue, but this is no different. Particularly when one area is just better positioned than another area to take advantage and make a region more sustainable. Why not include those that may not have those opportunities to be included and see some of these projects?
Well, thank you, Eddie. And I want to thank our panel for doing an outstanding job. Elizabeth, I'm sorry we didn't get to hear your full presentation, but as you all can see, this is an extremely complex issue that we probably are asking more questions than we're getting answers to. But that's where this change starts, from dialogue, from asking those questions, having those discussions with our colleagues. I'm going to now turn this over to Paul Hernandez.
Thank you, Gene. Perfect. First and foremost, thank you very much, Gene, and I want to certainly thank all of our panelists for joining us today and sharing your thoughts and recommendations as to how we can move through, this drought. Not only today's drought, but also the future droughts. As we all know, this is a cyclical issue, and it's something that comes from time to time. One thing I also want to make sure that we think is each of our sponsors, Eastern Municipal Water District, the California Water Service, and Leo Trial, attorneys at law. Please feel free to follow them as noted here. As we end today's conversation, I want to make sure that we leave today with this webinar as a catalyst for future conversations that we have with our colleagues and with our residents and our other stakeholders. This is, as mentioned earlier, this is a collaborative effort that we have to do throughout the state, not just within our own backyard, but within up and down California. And only through working with each of our partners, those elected officials, from Northern California, Central California, and Southern California, and all the way out in the Coachella Valleys and Central Valleys and all these other parts that are being affected severely by the water. This is where we're able to reach across the aisles and reach across the regions to help create solutions and begin those dialogues. Because until then, it's going to be much more of a challenge for us to be able to provide the resiliency that several of our water agencies have put into place several years ago, and including the past results. As we move towards next year, as our board president and founder, Victor Grego, mentioned, next year is our 10th year anniversary and years of service. We have some exciting events planned for us next year. First and foremost, on April 2nd in the Central Valley, we'll be hosting a conference for the first time in Wells history. So I ask each and every one of you to be on the lookout for this invitation and join us to learn more about some of the challenges and some of the opportunities that are available not only for the Central Valley, but also for those up and down California. In addition to that, we also are going to be hosting our Southern California conference. This will be more of our 10th anniversary celebration conference that we typically host up and down California, either in northern part or in Southern California. This year, it'll be in Southern California. And so we extend an invitation to you to join us for that. And of course, in the next early part of January 2022 or February, we're going to be having 2 more additional webinars. So please join us for these series, as we believe this helps begin the dialogue and encourages others to be able to be part of this conversation as we move forward, specifically during this period of time when we will know how the snowpack, the rainfall is affecting us as we move forward.
Hey, Paul, if I can interject real quick, we did get a response from one of our listeners that California exports approximately 44 to 46% of its agricultural product annually.
That is correct. Thank you, Gene, for that. And on that note, again, please follow us on our social media sites as listed on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about us. And again, as Victor mentioned, we certainly want to thank all of our WELLOs that participated, our current and our future WELLOs that participated in today's webinar, from Director Sudeth, former council member Belen, also our supervisor Lucetto from up north, council member Edward Martinez, water director with the San Gabriel Valley Water District, Mr. Vargas, our council members, Scholar Procero, and also our good friends with the Metropolitan Water District. So on that note, I want to wish you all a very happy New Year's and Christmas as we move forward to the next year. Thank you very much, and thank you for joining us for this important conversation. Bye.
Thank you.